It began with a whisper from the east, rumors of a great death that was stripping cities bare along the Silk Road. But in the 14th century, news traveled slowly. The people of Europe felt safe in their walled cities and stone cathedrals. They were wrong. In October 1347, 12 trading galleys appeared on the horizon of the Mediterranean, limping into the port of Messina. On the docks, the air was thick with the smell of salt and rotting fish, but as the ships drew closer, a new scent emerged. A sickly sweet smell of decay. When the port authorities climbed aboard, they found a ghost ship. Those still breathing were clawing at their own throats, their bodies distorted by egg-sized swellings in their groins and armpits, swellings that leaked blood and black bile. The Messina authorities panicked. They drove the ships back out to sea with fire and blades, but the damage was done. The invisible killer had already jumped ship. In the fur of 1,000 rats, on the backs of 1,000,000 fleas, the Black Death had stepped onto European soil. Within weeks, the bells of Messina wouldn't stop ringing for the dead until there was no one left to ring them. To understand why the Black Death was so terrifying, you have to understand the sheer helplessness of the medieval mind. They had no concept of biology, no idea that a microscopic organism called Yersinia pestis was hijacking their lymphatic systems. The disease was a three-headed hydra. The most common was the bubonic plague. It started with a headache and a fever that felt like fire in the veins. Then came the buboes, agonizing, hard swellings of the lymph nodes. If these swellings burst, you might live. If they turned black and stayed hard, you were a dead man walking. But the plague evolved. It became pneumonic, moving from the blood to the lungs. Now, you didn't need a flea bite to die. You only needed to breathe. Every cough, every sneeze sent a cloud of death into the air. In this form, the mortality rate was 95%. And finally, the rarest and swiftest, septicemic. This version bypassed the lungs and the nodes and went straight for the blood. Victims would literally turn black while still alive, their fingers, toes, and noses dying and rotting as they breathed. From the first symptom to the final breath, it often took less than 24 hours. Imagine eating breakfast with your brother, only to be dragging his body to a pit before sunset. That was the pace of the Black Death. As the plague swept north, the very foundation of human civilization began to crack. We like to think that in times of crisis, humanity comes together. The Black Death proved the opposite. In Florence, the historian Boccaccio wrote that fathers abandoned their sons and wives abandoned their husbands. Fear was more contagious than the disease itself. The rich fled to their country villas, locking the gates behind them, while the poor were left to die in the gutters. The church, the only source of hope for the medieval soul, was powerless. Priests, who were expected to give last rites, died in such numbers that the Pope had to grant permission for lay people and even women to hear confessions. Economic life stopped. Crops rotted in the fields because there was no one to harvest them. Massive herds of sheep and cattle wandered aimlessly through the countryside, dying of neglect. In London, the smell was so overpowering that the city was described as one giant tomb. They began digging plague pits, massive trenches, where bodies were stacked in layers, separated only by a thin dusting of lime. They called it trenching the dead, like stacking layers of goods in a warehouse. There was no dignity in death anymore, only math. When medicine fails and prayer goes unanswered, humans look for someone to blame. The 1340s saw a surge in religious extremism. The flagellants appeared hordes of men and women who wandered from town to town, stripped to the waist, whipping themselves with iron-tipped scourges. They believed the plague was a divine punishment for the sins of the world, and only through their own blood could they appease an angry God. But the darkness went deeper. A horrific wave of anti-Semitism swept Europe. Rumors spread that Jewish communities were poisoning the wells to kill Christians. Despite the Pope's attempts to protect them, Thousands of innocent people were burned alive in pogroms across Germany and France. It was a period of collective psychosis. The world was ending, and in their madness, people chose to burn what was left of it. By 1353, the fire of the plague had burned itself out, mostly because it had run out of people to kill. But the Europe that emerged was unrecognizable. The survivors woke up to a world where labor was suddenly a precious commodity. Before the plague, there were too many workers and not enough land. Now, the surviving peasants realized they had power. They demanded higher wages. They demanded their freedom from the lords. The feudal system, the rigid structure that had held Europe in place for centuries, simply shattered. This labor shortage forced a new kind of thinking. People began to invent. They looked for ways to do more with fewer hands, leading to better watermills, more efficient plows, and eventually, the printing press. The wealth that had been concentrated in the hands of a few was now distributed among the many. This great reset led directly to the Renaissance. Out of the ashes of the Black Death, humanity found a new curiosity, a new value for the individual, and a new drive to understand the world through science rather than just superstition. The Black Death was the darkest chapter in human history, but it was also the forge that hammered out the modern world. It taught us that even in the face of total extinction, the human spirit doesn't just survive, it evolves.